You are standing in near total darkness. The stone beneath your feet is slick with something you cannot identify, and you do not want to. Above you, the roar is so loud it feels like the earth itself is screaming. 50,000 voices, unified in bloodlust, celebrating a victory you watched destroy everything you loved. Your brothers died less than an hour ago. Their bodies are still being dragged across the sand by hooks. And now, a guard is walking toward your cell with a torch, and you understand with absolute clarity that what comes next will make you envy the dead. If you've ever wondered what really happened in the underground chambers of the Colosseum after the crowds went home, hit that like button right now. Drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from, because it's genuinely incredible that we've built a global community united by curiosity about history's darkest truths. Subscribe, because once you understand what happened in those rooms, you'll never see ancient Rome the same way again. This is not a story about gladiatorial combat. This is a story about what Rome gave its champions as rewards, about a system so methodical, so thoroughly documented, and so morally catastrophic that Roman senators themselves fought over whether to even acknowledge its existence. What you're about to hear comes directly from the accounts of Cassius Dio, confirmed by Senate records housed in the Vatican archives, and supported by archaeological excavations conducted beneath the Colosseum in 2018. This is not speculation. This is not myth. This was policy, and it reveals something about the nature of power that every civilization must confront. The moment entertainment becomes indistinguishable from atrocity, the moment a culture can no longer tell the difference between celebration and cruelty, that civilization has already begun to collapse from within. The year was 79 AD, and Rome had just perfected a machine that turned human suffering into civic ritual. The Colosseum was not just an arena, it was a theological statement, a monument to the idea that dominance, once achieved, must be performed again and again to remain real. The building had been completed only 1 year earlier, in 80 AD, under the reign of Emperor Titus, who inaugurated it with games lasting 100 days. The structure could hold 50,000 spectators arranged by social rank, from senators in marble seats near the arena floor to slaves standing in the wooden rafters. The architecture itself was a lesson in hierarchy. But the true genius of the Colosseum was not what could be seen. It was what lay beneath. The hypogeum, a two-level subterranean complex of tunnels, cages, and chambers, stretched across an area larger than most Roman villas. Here, in engineered darkness, the empire stored its most valuable inventory: exotic animals shipped from Africa, condemned criminals awaiting execution, and prisoners of war categorized by utility: lions in iron cages, condemned men shackled to walls, women sorted by age, origin, and perceived value. Everything was cataloged. Everything had a purpose. The sand covering the arena floor above was not decorative. It was functional, designed to absorb blood, urine, and whatever else poured from the bodies of the dying. When it became too saturated, slaves raked it away and brought fresh loads from the Tiber. The games themselves were never random. They followed a strict schedule orchestrated by the editor Munoris, the producer of the games, who balanced spectacle with pacing. Mornings featured Venetians, staged animal hunts where bears fought bulls or leopards were loosed on unarmed deer. Midday brought the Noxi, the execution of criminals. Often dressed in costumes to reenact myths, men burned alive as Hercules, women mauled by animals while tied to posts as Andromeda. Afternoons were reserved for the main event: gladiatorial combat. The only part modern audiences remember, the only part Hollywood bothers to show. But what happened after the final bout? After the victor raised his sword and the crowd erupted, was carefully omitted from almost every historical record. Not because it was rare, because it was routine when a gladiator won a significant fight, especially during games celebrating a military triumph. Roman custom granted him primia victori, the spoils of victory. This could mean money, wine, or freedom. But it also included something else, something the Romans referred to with bureaucratic efficiency as captivae aducium, captive women for use. These were not criminals. They were prisoners of war, often from noble families, taken during Rome's relentless campaigns across Gaul, Germania, Dacia, and Britannia. They were the daughters of chieftains, the wives of warriors, the priestesses of defeated gods. Rome did not simply kill its enemies, it needed to break them so completely that rebellion would become not just futile, but unthinkable. And so the system was designed not with sadism, but with logistics, not with passion, but with paperwork. After every major victory, the quaestor's financial officers cataloged prisoners by category. Men of fighting age were sent to the mines or the arena. The elderly and infirm were sold to agricultural estates, and the women, especially those young and from prominent families, were held in reserve. Some were auctioned to wealthy Romans as domestic slaves. Others were distributed to gladiators as incentives, rewards calibrated to encourage greater violence in future bouts. The chambers where this occurred were not improvisations. They were part of the original architectural plans, built into the eastern section of the hypogeum with the same precision as the lion pits and the elevators that lifted fighters to the surface. The rooms were small, rectangular, and cleaned regularly. Iron rings were embedded in the stone walls. Drainage channels ran along the floors. These were not cells. They were stages for a ritual the empire refused to name but refused to stop. In August of 79 AD, a gladiator named Gaius Valerius Maximus stood in the center of the Colosseum and killed a man in front of 50,000 witnesses. He was 32 years old, born into slavery after his father died in debtor's prison. He had been fighting for 14 years. 89 men had died by his hand in official combat, their names recorded in the arena logs, though none of them would be remembered. His body was a map of survival scar tissue across his shoulders, a crooked nose broken 3 times, a missing tooth from a blow that should have killed him. He fought with a gladius, a short sword designed for close-quarters brutality, and a rectangular shield that doubled as a weapon when swung edgeways. His dream was simple: earn the rudes, the wooden sword symbolizing freedom. His greatest fear was dying anonymously, dragged across the sand by meat hooks and dumped into the mass grave beneath the arena where slaves cremated bodies in shifts. But on this particular afternoon, he did something extraordinary. He defeated a Dacian champion named Decebalus in front of Emperor Titus himself, driving his sword through the man's throat with such precision that death was instantaneous. The crowd erupted. Titus rose from his seat, extended his thumb, and granted Maximus the victor's privileges. Within the hour, where an official presented him with a bronze tablet listing his rewards, 500 denarii, a laurel wreath, and first selection from among the female captives taken during General Marcus Antonius's suppression of the Dacian rebellion. This was not unusual. It was protocol. It had been protocol for generations. What made this moment different was not what Maximus was offered. It was what he would choose to do. 87 Dacian women had been taken prisoner 3 months earlier during the final assault on the highland fortress of Sarmazi. Among them was a 19-year-old named Sabina, daughter of a minor Dacian noble. Before the war, she had been engaged to a warrior named Decebulus with her, the same man Maximus killed that day. The records do not say, though the coincidence haunted later historians. Her village had been burned in retaliation for harboring rebels. Her 2 younger brothers, ages 14 and 16, had been executed publicly in the forum of a nearby Roman garrison. She had watched from a cage. Now she stood in a holding cell with 17 other women, waiting for a fate she could not name but understood instinctively. The preparation began at midday. Guards entered the holding area carrying buckets of water and coarse cloth. The women were washed, their hair combed, their torn clothing replaced with plain tunics. An attendant inspected each one, marking details on wax tablets, age, origin, visible scars, signs of illness. They were being made presentable, not for mercy, for display. An older woman, a priestess named Zalmoxis, who had once tended the sacred flame in a Dacian temple, whispered what everyone already knew. They are preparing us for the games, or for what comes after. The women said nothing. There was nothing to say. Above them, the roar of the crowd swelled and fell like waves. At 3 in the afternoon, they were brought to the arena floor. Not all of them, just 20, selected for youth and perceived defiance. Sabina was among them. She stepped through the gate into blinding sunlight and a wall of sound so overwhelming it felt like a physical blow. She smelled roasted meat from the vendors, perfume drifting from the seats of wealthy matrons, and beneath it all, the iron stench of dried blood baking into the sand. A herald announced their crimes in Latin, which most of them did not understand: rebellion, treason, impiety toward Roman gods. Then came the twist. They would not be executed. They would fight each other. Wooden swords were distributed. The winners would be claimed by Rome's champions. The losers would die. The crowd roared its approval. This was entertainment. This was justice. This was Rome. Sabina gripped the wooden sword, the rough grain scraping her palm. Across from her stood Comescus, a woman she had known all her life. Comescus had taught her to weave. Comescus had sung at her engagement ceremony. Comescus was the sister of the man Sabina had loved. Their eyes met. The editor, Munurus, raised his hand. The crowd screamed. He dropped his hand. Neither woman moved. For 90 seconds, the greatest empire on earth was defied by 2 unarmed prisoners standing still. Then the guards moved in. Comescus was struck from behind with the flat of a blade and collapsed. Sabina screamed and dropped her weapon, rushing toward her. Both were dragged from the arena, not to execution, but to the chambers below, where bureaucracy resumed with terrifying efficiency. A scribe made a notation: captive, duodation, origin, resistant, transferred for private allocation. They were separated immediately. Sabina was taken to a small room in the eastern hypogeum. It was clean. There was a bench. Iron rings were set into the wall, the door locked from the outside. At 4 o'clock, Gaius Valerius Maximus entered the room. The door opened. Their eyes met. He was still in full arena gear. Someone else's blood streaked across his chest. She was pressed against the far wall, unarmed, exhausted, stripped of everything but breath. Between them stood the entire weight of Roman law. He had complete legal authority. She had none. She was classified as spolia victori, spoils earned through killing history. does not record what Maximus thought in that moment. Did he see a person or property? Did he question the system, or simply accept it as every gladiator before him had? All we know is what happened next. He removed his helmet, set his sword on the floor, and sat down on the bench with his head in his hands. For 5 minutes he said nothing. Sabina remained frozen. Then he spoke haltingly in broken Dacian, a language he had learned from other captives over the years. What was his name? She did not understand at first. "Your man," he clarified. "The one they made you watch die." "Discibolus?" she whispered. Maximus looked up. "I killed a Discibolus today. Dacian, your age could be family. Your people use that name often." She said nothing. He nodded slowly. "I had a brother once. He died when I was 9. Fever or starvation. I don't remember which anymore." What followed was not the assault Rome expected. It was a conversation between two people the empire had tried, with all its machinery and violence, to strip of every shred of humanity. Maximus told her about his father, executed for debt when he was a child. Sabina explained how her village had been burned, how her brothers had begged for water before they died. 2 hours passed. Guards checked twice, heard voices, assumed compliance, and walked on. At 6 o'clock, Maximus stood, walked to the door, and called for the guard. "This woman is ill," he declared. "Infected. I refuse the allocation. Send her to the physician." It was the only loophole Roman bureaucracy allowed. If a captive was deemed diseased, a gladiator could legally refuse her and return her to general holding. The lie was transparent. The guard knew it immediately. But Roman procedure ran on rigid protocol. Challenging a gladiator's decision meant paperwork, witnesses, a formal inquiry. Accepting the refusal took seconds. And so Sabina was removed, transferred to the medical holding section, her immediate fate forestalled. She died 3 days later. Not from violence, but from a simple infection, the most common killer in Roman captivity. The medical unit was overcrowded, filthy, staffed by indifferent slaves. The mercy that spared her from one horror delivered her directly into another. Maximus never saw her again. He fought twice more that month. He won both times, and both times he refused his reward. The whispers began immediately. Maximus had gone soft. Maximus had joined one of those strange Eastern cults that preached compassion. Maximus had been cursed by Dacian witches. Arena officials watched him carefully. Rejecting the spoils once could be explained. Rejecting them repeatedly was an insult to Roman custom, a challenge to the entire structure of incentive and reward that kept gladiators fighting. On September 15th, 79 AD, Senator Quintus Aurelius Simpicus stood before the Roman Senate with a formal complaint. His young nephew, a junior gladiator, had been beaten by his trainer for refusing the customary reward after a victory. The nephew claimed he had been inspired by Maximus's example. The trainer insisted he was simply enforcing Roman tradition. It was a trivial case, hardly worth senatorial attention, except that it forced Rome's most powerful men to publicly acknowledge a practice everyone knew existed, but no one ever discussed. Senate records, the sanitized versions that survived, mention only a debate concerning the propriety of certain customs regarding defeated female captives. That bland phrase concealed a 4-hour political battle. The conservative faction, led by Senator Fabius, invoked precedent. Our ancestors conquered body and spirit. That is what forged our greatness. To question it now is to dishonor every triumph that built this empire. The reformist bloc, influenced by Stoic philosophy and pragmatic concerns, countered, "We are not intimidating our enemies, we are radicalizing them. Dead rebels are forgotten. Traumatized survivors become the mothers of future insurgents." The turning point was not moral, it was strategic. 3 provincial governors had recently reported increased unrest in Dacia, Germania, and Britannia. Each cited Rome's treatment of captive women as propaganda used by resistance movements. These were not philosophers objecting on principle. These were administrators warning that Rome's own practices were fueling the rebellions it sought to crush. On October 1, 79 AD, the Senate passed what historians would later call the Lex Captivitas, the law of captive women. Its terms were limited, but unprecedented. Female prisoners of war could not be distributed as public rewards in the arena. Public humiliation of conquered women was banned from official spectacles. Enforcement was inconsistent. Many arena managers ignored it or invented loopholes, but the principle stood. Even Rome, at the height of its power, recognized that some cruelties were too dangerous to perform in daylight. 3 months later, Gaius Valerius Maximus earned his freedom not for kindness, but for surviving 5 consecutive bouts during the emperor's birthday games. His final recorded act as a free man was purchasing the freedom of a woman named Camascus, listed only as a captive from Dacia. Many historians believe she was the same woman who stood beside Sabina in the arena, the woman who refused to fight. Maximus spent nearly all his prize money to buy her contract from the state. After that, she vanished from the record entirely. For her refusal carried consequences that stretched beyond death. In 2018, archaeologists from the University of Rome, led by Dr. Isabella Fortunato, excavated a forgotten section of the eastern hypogeum. What they uncovered was absent from museum exhibits and tourist scripts. They found a cluster of small chambers, each roughly 10 by 12 feet, with iron rings set into the walls at waist height. Drainage channels cut across the floors. Scratch marks, likely made by fingernails or stones, covered the plaster. Pottery fragments suggested that food and water had been delivered regularly. Carbon dating confirmed the rooms were original to the Colosseum's construction in 80 AD 6 bronze tags stamped with Captiva and dated between 79 and 82 AD matched the years of the Dacian campaigns. Cassius Dio had mentioned allocation chambers. Seneca hinted at customs he refused to describe. Even Tacitus, usually unflinching, stayed silent. The architecture revealed what the texts obscured. The system was real, structured, and deliberate. Rome did not merely commit cruelty, it organized it. It built infrastructure for suffering, recorded it, and normalized it. Its engineering genius existed beside moral emptiness. And the crowds cheered because power performed convincingly resembled virtue. Sabina died in a filthy cell. Maximus disappeared into obscurity. The system endured, and the ruins remain, asking what monuments we are building now and what future archaeologists will find buried beneath them.